And joining me now is the creator of The Diplomat, which we're all excited is still going. Can't wait for the next season. It's Debora Cahn. She has been working in the world of television with political dramas for some time now, and West Wing, Homeland, but The Diplomat is one that she created. And there's a fun backstories, plural, that I've heard about, and backstories that you haven't told that I hope to prod out of you. Debora Cahn, welcome to the ToddCast.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
So let's talk about, before we get into the nuts and bolts of making The Diplomat and getting access to the embassy residence itself, which is always, I love that story in the UK. It was really cool to feel as if, hey, I've landed in a helicopter on the back lawn of that thing, and I'll get into that. But you've done what a lot of people in journalism and sometimes in the political world all want to do, is you broke into Hollywood. You've been writing you from West Wing, and I'm very curious of your thoughts on Mr. Sorkin, and what you're doing today. How'd you do it? A lot of my listeners, a lot of the hosts of this podcast all want to know how you did it.
Well, I was not a politics person. I had been an intern on Capitol Hill once upon a time, but not for very long, and didn't. I think when I first had to interview with Aaron to go work on the West Wing, I went back and watched all the Schoolhouse Rock, like How a Bill Becomes a Law.
Make sure you knew how important was that in the West Wing writers' room? Because it's funny, I have a hot and cold relationship with West Wing. I love Sorkin, love a lot of the stuff he's done. As somebody who worked in politics in the 90s and worked in media in the 90s, I hated West Wing. Only because it was not realistic. I'd be like, God damn it, they keep making things look like it's that easy, or that a president will just march up to the Hill and here it is. And yet you're telling me that, how important was it to be realistic or not when it came to the West Wing?
When I came into the West Wing, which was in the 4th season, they were looking for a lot of people who had real Washington experience. And
more than just Lawrence O'Donnell?
A lot. Well, Lawrence was there at that time. He was also there a little bit earlier, but they were they hired 8 new people, most of whom had been consultants or worked on campaigns or, worked on the Hill for X years. And I had kind of just enough Washington to get myself in the door. And when I saw everybody else who was there, I was like, oh, I'm going to be fired this afternoon.
Because you thought you didn't have enough of the Washington experience to keep up with the writer's room?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I was just flooded with nausea every day for the first few months. And
that's always the best feeling to make you work harder. I've always
it did. It made me work really fucking hard, man.
Yeah,
but,
I bet.
But I also realized, and I think they realized at a certain point, that I didn't have the kind of background that everybody else in the room did, but everybody else in the room had that. And so I didn't need to. Whereas I was coming in, like Aaron, who I absolutely loved working for, and I have always been a huge fan of his writing. Dude's got a musical theater background, and I'd come from the theater, like that. The rhythm and the musicality that I think was such a big part of what he was doing was something that I understood, and that was something that I kind of had a biorhythmic sense of, and so I brought that to the table, which was a different thing. And
tell me how did you infuse the style of musical theater into West Wing, which of course didn't have musical interludes?
Well, a lot of it is about rhythm. People talk about how fast people talked on the West Wing, and the patter and the interplay of characters. That very much comes from.
There was definitely, it felt like you wanted it to fit the moment or almost feel lyrical in some ways.
Yeah. And scenes were written musically, and
Interesting.
yeah, absolutely.
Should West Wing have been? Have you ever thought about re readapting West Wing as a musical?
As a musical, it's something to look into. I'm not really sure I'm the person to make it happen, but
I mean, we do all these readaptations all the time, right? You're like, boy, that's one that I hadn't thought about, but you go get like you go I would love to see Lin-Manuel Miranda and Aaron Sorkin team up and make it a musical, right? Like in theory, that would be
look,
interesting.
without question, there is a huge, DNA relationship between the
Yeah.
work of Lin-Manuel Miranda and Aaron Sorkin. So
Go back to that writer's room. What did you learn? Was that your first big writer's room?
that was my first writer's room where I was not an assistant. I had been in
Gotcha.
one writer's room before that, and my job was to take notes. So
Gotcha.
I was what was called a baby writer, and I was there to be seen and not heard and do research.
So, it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who I've been working on projects with off and on for a while that you know, not projects that haven't succeeded yet, right? They're just
Yeah.
the ones that haven't been bought yet. And he talks about the challenge, like that in the post-COVID era and with Zoom, how he misses the old everybody in the same room, writer's room, that there's too many Zoom writers' rooms these days. You feel that way?
Uh, on this show, I have what I guess would be called a hybrid room,
Hmm.
which is I have 2/3 of the staff here in New York. We actually meet in the room that I'm sitting in, and we sit around old school on a bunch of couches and uh, talk about what the stories should be. And we do have two people on Zoom because they live in LA.
Hmm.
And we there are some writers' rooms where you're in there all day. We don't do that. We are together for about 2 or 3 hours a day. We
Hmm.
have a conversation. There's something that's nice about first of all, when there's only 2 people on Zoom, you don't feel like you're sort of married to the
Yeah.
screen. You're having a
You
conversation.
probably are actually have a
They're
hard
in it.
time keeping the two people on Zoom and forgetting that they're there, I imagine sometimes. I mean, that can
They
happen.
like everybody has it like it's their job
Yeah,
to stay engaged and it's their job to
sure.
be in conversation and they do. The people who have continued to do that over the time are the ones who are good at finding what the role can be from a distance. So, but yeah, I mean, in person it's definitely a major, major improvement. We started the show in the very, very beginning. We were exclusively online, and it was
Hmm.
absolutely
Because
miserable.
that was
Horrible.
right at COVID, the start of COVID, right? When you
Yeah.
guys first started. Yeah.
Well,
So tell me about how long you've been working on The Diplomat. Is this one of those passion projects you've been noodling with it for a decade, or is this something that came to you, during the start of COVID?
so I guess 20 years is the
Okay.
answer. So
So
when I
this
was
is
on
a passion project in many ways. You've had this in the back of your head for a while.
well, Western was this incredible gift of being able to write a great character drama that was about things that mattered, and I think that the show managed to give people a window into domestic politics, was slightly colored window, but it
But it
was
educated. It had
nonetheless,
some educating. It had some educating that I still think, as much as I get frustrated when I hear people say, "Why can't it be like on the West Wing?" It's like, well, yeah, well, why can't a lot of things be the way we
yeah,
could imagine them, right? It's because it's called life, right? It's the real
yeah,
world. But
yeah.
that
So
doesn't
I
mean a lot
wanted
of people
to
didn't learn things about the system by watching West Wing, which is a net positive.
absolutely. And I wanted to do on a foreign policy level what we had done on a domestic policy level, and I
Hmm.
also wanted to do I I wanted to, sort of take us out of foreign policy conversations that consisted of us and the enemy,
Mm.
us, the bad guy, or us and the Brits, or
Hmm.
the Chinese, like, as though millions of people are a single,
Right.
hive mind, and they just aren't, uh, and I wanted to maybe give people a clearer sense of how decisions are made that can, put one in a war footing or, uh, how those things kind of get unpacked in the way that we saw them on the West Wing getting unpacked in the offices where people are trying to figure out how to articulate something and what's the actual goal and what are the differences of opinion in the backstage of that world.
Look, I have been happy to see this become more nuanced in general when it comes to sort of dramas like The Sympathizer, which was
Oh, so
about
great.
right, and it
Yeah.
was like the perspective of the North Vietnamese, right, which we didn't fully, you don't get. And yes, they used some satire to do it, but it was like just remembering that, hey, we're all human beings and we all react to things sometimes the same way, even if our brains are reoriented in the opposite, right? Like it's just and introducing that nuance, and where sometimes you don't know who the heroes are, right?
Yeah,
We're not always the hero, you
exactly.
know. And before we get to Diplomat, how important was your time on Homeland in order to sort of prepare to succeed with the Diplomat?
Well, as soon as I finished The West Wing, I tried to do some sort of pilot that was about foreign aid workers or foreign
Mm,
correspondents, or I actually pitched a show that was based in an embassy,
mm,
and the attitude was, "It's not gonna work." There had
mm,
just been one that was set in the embassy in London, and it
mm,
disappeared after 3 episodes. It was not very good. So, it was always something that was in my mind, and then when
mhm,
I got the job on Homeland, I was so excited that, like, that was a way to do it, right? That was a conversation
mm,
about foreign policy, whether or not it was based in the war on terror and based, kind of around the conflicts that came out of those 2 wars. It was a foreign policy conversation, and I loved writing that show, but it was a very dark show. It was a very dark show, and
mhm.
coming out of that, I really wanted to try to figure out if there was a way to sort of have um, a less wrenching conversation, only
Mhm.
because, um, it can be hard to watch. Like, there's torture in that show. There's,
Yeah.
people rightly losing their minds over the questions that they're dealing with, which is not dishonest, but it's a hard place to visit. And so
It's
I
funny
wanted
you
to
put it
find
that
a
way.
way in that was a little
Yeah.
more
It's funny you
less.
put it that way in Homeland, because as much as I miss it, it was done. It had
Yeah.
run its course, because you're right. I don't know if I wanted to see Claire Danes suffer more.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if I wanted to see the mental health torture that was happening to everybody in that show. You're like, no more. And in the real world, these folks do leave after a term or a term and a half.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, they
That's enough.
just can't take it in that sense. So so the Diplomat, in some ways, it shaped a lot of your experiences are shaped here. And clearly you've had this idea of trying to um, pull back the curtain a little bit on international, what it is. Diplomacy is just a fancy name for international politics,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's one of the things I learned being traveling with Obama for 6 years as a White House correspondent, that I didn't fully appreciate. You sort of know intellectually, but you don't know until you're there, is how most international relations are simply no different than a president's relations with the governor of a state, meaning everybody's got their own politics they got to worry about, and
Yeah.
they bring it to these conversations.
Mhm.
And so it's when you put yourself in the shoes of their domestic politics, you suddenly can understand a point of view of another country
Mm.
a lot easier. So let's talk about the Diplomat. When did you get green lit?
Uh, I guess in 2020, I think in the
Before
fall.
or after the pandemic?
Uh, the first I was hired by Netflix to write a pilot,
Yeah.
and I got this idea to, try and interview a woman that had been an expert consultant on Homeland, a woman named Beth Jones, who,
Hmm.
was a diplomat for decades and, is amazing. She keeps trying to retire, and
Hmm.
they pull her back in, and, I decided I wanted to interview her and set up a time. We were gonna go, meet and have lunch in Washington, D.C. at the restaurant called Le Diplomat. And
Still a
then,
fairly hot restaurant, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah,
It's, like anything, the more popular something gets, the it's at its peak, and the question is, it only can go in one direction, but it's still a hot restaurant.
smelled good. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had to cancel it because there was like this weird flu going around.
Yeah.
So I guess it must have been March of 2019.
So in some ways, the shutdown, I mean, what better time to focus on writing a pilot than having nothing else to do but be shut in and focused on that?
It was a
Helpful,
good
or
time
was
to
it?
write,
Yeah,
and it
yeah,
was also a good time to talk to I was like, "This is gonna be a disaster. I can't go to Washington and sit in a room with people," and that was true on a certain level, but there was also the level of, like, you could get Tony Blinken on the phone.
everybody was bored, right? Everybody could,
Everybody
hey,
was
I'm
sitting
available. I can't
around.
go anywhere. Let's
Yeah.
do Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Here we
So I
go.
actually ended up talking to, I think, a lot more people than I would have under normal circumstances, just because everybody was willing to get on the telephone.
So, what do you have a couple of diplomats in your head that were the people's whose sort of biography? I let me I don't before suggesting a name, I wanted to see if you modeled. I have a couple of ideas in my head, but I'm just curious if you modeled some of the characters, and I'm off of actual people.
I mean, it's a bunch of people and it's definitely the ones that you think. Beth Jones was a huge piece of it. Sam Powers was obviously a piece of it.
Yeah,
Uh, Susan Rice is in there, Wendy Sherman is in there, Hillary Clinton is in there. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of
yeah.
people.
Richard Holbrooke feels like the husband.
Richard Holbrooke,
He feels like the husband, who, by the way, is my he's he's I feel like you have more fun with his character than anybody else's character.
he's a lot of fun. He's a lot of
Yeah.
fun, and as I'm sure you know, George Packer wrote this book called Our Man about Richard Holbrooke, and it
So
was a
you Yeah.
hugely influential text. One of
Okay.
our
It makes me
primary.
feel better. I'm like, that's got to be Richard Holbrooke, because his attitude at times that he's smarter than the president, or that he actually knows these things better. And, look, Richard Holbrooke was one of these people that you wanted to have dinner with because he had amazing stories.
Yeah.
And you created a character that he weirdly is the magnet. Like, you're just like, I want to hear more of his war stories, even though he's probably not the right person for the job in that moment.
Holbrook was so fantastically polarizing, and
Oh,
people
yes.
loved him or hated him, and the people who hated him the most used to be people who loved him the most. So, that tension of you can't help but fall in love with this guy right
Yeah.
up until the point where you wanna kill him
Yeah.
is was a fantastic basis for a character.
Okay. So that makes me feel better that I'm not like wanting something to be true. And it's like it feels like, and it only adds to me the authenticity of what you did. Um
There's an
it
actor called Hal Holbrook.
yes.
Richard Holbrook, Hal Holbrook, Hal. That's why he's called.
Oh, that's why you call him Hal. I love it. I'm sorry that I didn't put that easy piece of the puzzle together. But fantastic, even better for the homage. Although, the more we talk, the Holbrook family may want a piece of the action.
I would love to talk with them. I'm a fan of the documentary that his son made.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
No, I think there probably are even more stories that are worth in using him as an inspiration on. So how hard or easy was it to get the embassy residence as a set?
So
What is it? Winfield Place, we call it? What do we call it? What's the official name?
so the ambassador's residence is called Winfield
Win,
House,
Winfield House.
and
Thank you.
then there's an embassy. We the first time we looked at any of those buildings, we went to the embassy and they were very skeptical of, a television show was gonna come in, and they felt sure that we were gonna do some sort of horrific caricature of martini-toting diplomats.
Mm,
And then we said we had been sent by Beth Jones,
mm.
and across the board, she gave me my first job, or she
Oh,
taught me
wow.
everything I know, or I've modeled my career on her. So as soon as they knew that we were kind of friends of Beth,
Hmm.
we were welcomed with open arms at the embassy itself. They allowed us very kindly to film there, and that had not really been done before. Uh, and we were also welcomed as guests at Winfield House at the residence. They offered to allow us to film there as well, on the inside of the house,
Hmm.
and we explained that if we filmed the inside of the house, we would need to be there for about 7 months, at
They
which
didn't like
point
that. Yeah.
the invitation was rescinded.
Rescinded. Yeah. Yeah.
So we, basically 1 day per season, we film at the real Winfield house, and we
Hmm.
usually end up using the gate, just the front
Hmm.
gate of the house, and then there's a big, gorgeous house about a half an hour north of the center of London called Rudham Park, which is what we use for our Winfield.
For the Winfield house. Was that an actual? Was that the Winfield house that the helicopter landed in, or not?
Yeah.
Okay. I was telling my wife, I'm like, that it's one of the cool. I just happen like people don't need to know the intricate details, but I happened to be on press pool that day. I needed to like, I was able to be, which really meant was I was on the latest possible flight with Air Force One to get to London, and because we had to like travel with him, I had to go on the helicopter, and it was. I'm so glad I did. It's like a cool experience, and I'm like to be able to like no, I've done that exact landing there, except we were on a military plane, so we were strapped to the sides, and then this, wasn't a comfortable helicopter, and it was not
No.
not the
No.
best ride there. When it comes to your story arc, and I'm going to assume that folks listening to this have seen the first two seasons, and I'm not asking you for spoilers, but I'm curious, have you changed your narrative arc, or did you know where this story was going in 2020?
Oh, no, it's changed all along the way.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. Okay.
and for me, that's the joy of writing television. You know,
Did
you
you think
come
you were
up with
doing
an
one season
idea.
at first? Did you just
What?
write it assuming one season? Did you assume only one season and you wanted to have a story that sort of, just in case you only got one season and it was going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end?
Yeah, no,
Or
I'm Jewish, I prepare for failure.
yes,
So I
right.
assumed that it would be 1 season and done, and,
Because season
but I
one
had a
definitely
longer
ended.
plan.
Yeah, season one definitely ended where you could go either direction. You saw, and it was like, okay, let's see if they get a set. Let's see if they get renewed. I think you got renewed like within the first 2 weeks of the drop, if I'm not mistaken. You probably know best, but it
Yeah,
was right around that
yeah.
time. Um, but then when you ended season two, it was clear it was a cliffhanger, right? It was clear there was definitely another season coming. So that's why I was curious if, like, how much of this story arc did you have sort of storyboarded versus changing as you went?
Well, let me just say for those in your audience who are writing pieces like this, it's not an accident that there was like, "Oh my god, who's gonna survive the
Yeah.
car bombing at the end of," and that there was an, "Oh my god," at the
Yeah.
end of season 2. I mean, you do wanna create a situation where also Netflix wants to know what's gonna happen. So, and that sometimes it, you know, definitely helps. But the world has not, stopped turning even for a second, to let us tell any story that we thought we would have told a couple of years ago.
Right.
You and I have a friend in common,
Yes.
who, Daphne Linzer, who was helpful all along through the creation
Hmm.
of this series, and still now. And I talk to her a lot about the story that we were going to tell in the very first season. And while we were still writing that story, we were about 5 scripts in, and we had spoken to a woman named Heather Conley, who's a Russia expert. She's really
Hmm.
fantastic, brilliant woman. And the way that she talked about dealing with Russia was so fascinating, because we'd gone through this period of time of like, like 20 years of passive aggressive Russia, where
Right.
most of their foreign policy was conducted through covert operations that they pretended weren't happening. So
Hmm.
I was so taken with the idea of how do you fight an enemy who pretends they're not fighting with you.
Right.
And so I wrote this like 5 episodes of how do you deal with passive aggressive Russia. And Daphne called me on the phone one day and said, I have bad news for both you and millions of innocent civilians. Vladimir Putin is about to invade Ukraine. I thought,
There's no more passive aggressive. Yeah.
so we had to throw out a whole lot of story.
Wow. So that was going to be the heart of season 2.
That was going to be season 1.
Oh, season 1. Oh,
That was
okay.
going to be season 1. Yeah.
More about fighting the right. Interesting.
Yeah. All of this, all about, Russia had done something and was pretending they didn't. And so how would we respond?
So then you pivot to more of a domestic. Look, what I thought was brilliant with is how you turned the British Prime Minister into Trump.
Mhm.
And it was sort of because it felt accessible. You were like, I want to have a Trump-like character without making it divisive in American politics. Like if I were to say that was, if I were a Netflix exec or something, I'd be like, oh, that's a lot easier to sell than feeling as if you're quote unquote taking sides on the current domestic political debate. I just thought it was a brilliant choice. And I'm sorry that I looked up his name, Rory Kinnear. He's terrific. Just
He's
terrific in the role.
amazing. And, the idea was to give him a little bit of Trump and a little bit of Boris Johnson and
Sure. Yeah.
and to try and figure out what you do when there is a chaotic figure as a head of state. Like, what, how does everybody around that individual manage? So that was part of the brief. But Rory Kinnear is so good that he plays these scenes where the guy is chaotic and impulsive, but then always puts in a little bit of like really smart and
Sly like a fox. Yep.
absolutely
Yeah.
relatable.
Yeah.
So you can't dismiss the guy at all.
No. It's
And it made for
why
a much more interesting character.
I think you've done a better job of capturing all sides of Trump with that character than anybody else that has tried. I do think the great
Can we
challenge right now in
get
art.
that in writing somewhere?
Absolutely. Well, we
Could,
just put it in
on
we
a
put it in a
little
podcast. Yes.
pillow, maybe
We'll make you a pillow. I
little
think
eagle point.
I find the challenge of trying to write fiction, relatable fiction about the current world we're living in, because you want to do something slightly more absurd in order to make a point. And yet every time you think you've done something absurd, the real world catches up.
Satire, I think, is off the table for this decade.
Fascinating. Okay. Just
I
completely.
don't there's no way to go farther because I at least don't have the imagination to go farther than what we're actually
I have a
seeing
friend of mine who
or
says that in covering
unexpected.
Trump, that one of our problems in the news media is our own failure of imagination.
Yeah.
Meaning like we're never like, you think, well, he wouldn't do that, or the public wouldn't do that. Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing that we keep. So you're right. It's like beyond any imagination so far that we've had.
So I guess what I look at in terms of the kind of stories that we're telling is I'm less interested in the behavior of the head of state and a kind of a chaotic leader than I am in what it like, hundreds of thousands of other people work in the government.
Right.
Ours and everybody else's. And there may not be as much power concentrated in any single set of hands, but other people are doing the work a lot of the time, and for me to focus my attention on them, first of all, I find it very comforting.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a good reminder for my own mental health to think about, like, there's just hundreds of thousands of people who decided to go work for the country, and they could have made a lot more money doing really anything else. And they've committed themselves to making the world better for a whole lot of people that they don't know. And what I think Aaron really brilliantly did And the West Wing was sort of give you an idea of like what those people did during the day. If it was realistic or not realistic, at least you had a notion of like even what the job titles were. And
Mhm.
some of the things like what does a meeting look like and where does it happen? For me, just being able to envision what
Yeah.
somebody's life is like on the job gives you a little bit more of a sense of like, I don't know, maybe I could do that for a living. Like it just sort of demystifies it.
No, you're right about sort of I find the reason I don't get as alarmist about I worry about a lot of things that have weakened in our democracy, and there's no doubt in my business and the media we've got challenges and all this stuff. But the but the but the American democracy is so complicated and so embedded in so many different places that one person can create a lot of havoc and chaos,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of other people trying to prevent chaos, right? And so there is a balance out there, and it does seem like you're trying to give voice to the average foreign service worker who now, since you wrote season 2 to season 3, has been laid off. Um, so how
You're
much do
correct,
you
sir.
how
Yeah.
much are you in, I know you're in theory done writing season 3 and now you're shooting it, but there's a lot that has happened to the diplomatic corps over the last 6 months. Are we going to see hints of it in season 3?
Uh, season 3 is already in the can.
Right.
So, no.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, yeah, that was
You
written and
can't be
filmed
too Dick Wolf
long
ripped from the
ago.
headlines like that.
Yeah.
It's not that fast of a turnaround.
I mean, I gotta take my hat off to him. It's very difficult to be ripped from the headlines when you gotta figure out 18 months to 2 years ahead what's gonna be in the headlines. You just can't. You have to try the way that I try and think of it is like, what's the foreign policy headspace gonna be? Like, what are we all gonna be, like, what kind of conflict are we
Mhm.
gonna be thinking about? Not kind of what the specifics
Well,
of the
look, you're located in a great region right now. Europe's trying to figure out what the hell is America up to,
Yeah.
right? Are we partners or not? So as much as like there's a part of me that wonders if you've done enough of the China of Asia. Obviously, you're in London, so it's just geographically difficult. But considering the most unstable partner we have in the world right now all reside in Europe. All of our partners in Europe are not sure what to make of us right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, uh, there's something about, having our primary interlocutors in the show be the Brits. It takes away kind of certain perceptions that we have about individual conflicts. They
Mhm.
we feel like they're sort of like us, they're our cousins or whatever.
By the way, they're having all these same things. Brexit sort of
Yeah.
foreshadowed Trump. I'm obsessed right now. The Tories got clobbered. There may not even be a major party anymore in the UK, right? We may have a new
Can you
conser-
imagine not even knowing what to call the Conservative Party in your country?
it's astonishing, but I have this thesis that it's possible this could happen here. Literally the UK has foreshadowed a lot of things
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
us of late. And there was a time where I used to believe American politics was isolated from global trends, or perhaps I was arrogant enough to believe that much in American democ- democratic exceptionalism. But it's pretty clear the global trends, the American trends and the global trends are one and the same.
Yeah. They really are, but we're just sort of giving everything we supersize everything. We do it bigger, and then
Yes.
we encourage it on a mass scale around the
Mhm.
world, which is a bit of a
Uh,
bummer.
what is the downside for you in being news adjacent, right? You're not on the news, but you're news adjacent. And, I guess the risk is even in 18 months, you can feel out of date if whatever you're writing about's at just in the wrong moment for whatever reason, right?
Yeah, it's a risk all the time, and I never quite know if we've hit it or not hit it, and you don't know until it airs.
Mhm.
Uh, so the goal is to give ourselves a story that doesn't exist in the world right now, but has some of the similar kind of recipe
Mhm.
ingredients. And, uh, and just try to look at, like, the individual problems are hard to predict, but the kind of decision making stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
So we're really just taking apart, what does it mean to make a single foreign policy decision? What does it mean to make a single agreement, be it about a border or a line of text with another country? What are the elements that come into play
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to uh, communicate in a long-term relationship, like an alliance
Right.
or a marriage, which are the same.
One thing you do so well, I think, and certainly the women in my life appreciate it, is you write about strong women, but you make it a little messy, so that it is not
Get
just
what?
super a little messy. It's not
Yes.
just automatic superhero. It's no, frankly, it's like writing about messy men, right? We've been writing about messy men in power for 100 years since we've started fiction, and you're like, true equality isn't just women in power. It's, hey, women have messy relationships too.
Yeah. Yeah. My goal is always not in Pollyanna way, but like nobody's wrong in an
Mm-hmm.
argument. I feel like if somebody is clearly wrong in a debate that we're having about policy or about a personal interaction, then we've failed. Like that's just it's too easy. It's too pat. And so I want everybody to have an argument that I can get behind, and a nice sort of backstop is always whoever's right is also going to be, like manage to bungle their own rightness, which I find
You could be right
I
in
manage
theory,
to
but
do
terrible.
whenever I
Look,
that.
the American people like some of Trump's goals. They can't stand his execution. I mean, that's what sometimes somebody can be right about a problem, but they're they're wrong about how to execute the solution.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very wrong.
Shonda Rhimes versus Aaron Sorkin. You've worked for both of them. What's it like?
Uh, I learned a ton from both of them. Uh, and they're similar. In a bunch of ways. They both I before working with the 2 of them, I would get really attached to a story,
Hmm.
and I would think about a story and believe that there was a way to tell the story, and I had figured it out, and that was that. With both of them, they just churn through so much story so quickly, either because they're able to kinda tell it rapidly and move on, or, um who knows
But they
what
just don't
trip,
get attached. They don't get
but
caught up. They don't get stuck in it. It sounds like.
they'll mow down a bunch of stuff, and if you don't have 6 more ideas,
Yeah.
then you're out of the game. You can't come in the room with an idea that you believe in. You have to come in into
And if it doesn't
have
work,
an idea you
you better
believe
have
in,
five
it's
others.
gone, you're like,
Yeah.
"Okay, let me give you another one. Here's another way to tell the story." And
Yeah.
that impulse, y story like, I'm the boss now. I should be able to make sure a story stays in place. It doesn't. You lose your location, you lose,
Right.
an actor turns out to be like Rory Kinnear, like, he's too relatable. So now how do you tell the story with a guy who you can't.
Do you add scenes with him because he was so good at the character?
Oh, yeah, he was gonna be a much, much
Yeah.
smaller presence in the
Interesting.
show. He's such a pleasure to work with. It's a pleasure just to watch him film. Every take is completely different. You feel like you're at the
Wow.
theater. A lot of times, like, we've already got the scene and we're like, "No, let's have him do it one more time just to see."
Just because you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll have another interpretation we'll like better.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of TV. Like, you find people who you love to work with and you write story for them, and you
Mhm.
bend the story toward what their superpowers are.
Well, let me get you out of here on this. Who are some either nonfiction people in the real world, or jobs in the real world that you'd like to center a story around but haven't figured it out yet?
Hmm.
What's on your list there of like, boy, I'd love to figure out how to tell that story, but I haven't found a vehicle yet.
Um, this is gonna sound like an ass kissy answer, but it's true. And you actually can talk to my friend about, like, the only other story I've tried and not yet succeeded to write is about a newspaper. So,
Mm.
um, I have a real love for journalism and journalists, and that it was always like, is it going to be about people working in foreign aid or foreign relations, or is it going to be
Right.
about foreign correspondence? So,
It's interesting. Look, I've consumed every bit of fiction that has been made about the press,
yeah.
right? And whether the paper to me is still to this day, nothing captures the interplay of people in a newsroom like the paper. I still to this day, I had the exact argument over a chair.
Mhm.
Okay, early on, we were in a small, crappy, and it was only one good chair, and it would be this fight, and people would take masking tape to put their names on the chair, and I just remember going, yes, the chair, like that epitomizes
Yeah.
newsrooms, like the small and petty. It's such a drag. Everybody is so exhausted all the time that you do end up in a knockdown, drag out fight over a pen or a chair.
Yeah.
Um, but I almost wonder if we've lionized our industry too much. And then in so doing, the real journalists have let the public down, not because they've let the public down, but because we've fictionalized these heroic journalists, and they're just everyday Americans, everyday humans. They make mistakes and they have bosses and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, so what you're saying is there has yet to be a good three-dimensional portrayal of those characters.
You know
If
what? There
there
hasn't.
was,
You're right.
you wouldn't feel
You're
that
right. I just don't know what does the modern newsroom even look like? Like I'm trying to rebuild local newsrooms, and this whole influencer culture, right? Which is clearly going to be sort of, we went from journalists where you were trained in how to be a journalist, and then once you were trained in how to be a journalist, you were given a beat.
way.
Then we evolved into, you're an expert at a beat, we'll train you how to be a journalist.
Um,
And now we're sort of taking both of those ideas, and the experts are saying, well, I'm not going to join you to be a journalist. I'll just be my own influencer.
mhm.
Sometimes it'll be journalism. Sometimes it'll be commentary. Sometimes it'll be, something in between. So I kind of think I'm with you there, but I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what does a modern version of this even look like today? You know?
Well, when you figure it out in life, I will then write a series about it.
Because Sorkin did the Newsroom, and I hated it because, for a few things. One is, first of all, it's easy to get a story right when you have a year, okay, to write about it. But that's neither here nor there. But I don't think it portrayed it correctly. Like, I think it did not. I think it absolutely. It certainly wasn't my experience, and I'd like to think I had a fairly normal experience. Not, and certainly had, and it felt like an attempt to create, maybe what was in Keith Olbermann's brain, but what was in Keith Olbermann's brain was an outlier. It wasn't real. Like, it wasn't the experience of everybody else.
So there's still room there. There's room at that
Yeah.
table.
All right. Well, I appreciate
Thank
it.
you
Good
so
luck.
much.
And
This was really fun.
thank you for the Diplomat.
You.
I mean, I think we TV and political junkies love a good show that captures
We
both of those,
appreciate your support. We really do.
Excellent.